I want to thank you all on behalf of all my IBM colleagues, Scott Davis here with me, and the rest of the crew in the back for having us here and being part of your conference. We're really excited to do this, and we understand, and listening to the conversation this morning, just how important this whole interoperability process between systems and people really is, and especially I think based on the last conversation about down to the individual child, because at the end of the day that's really what we're talking about here. And then to be the fact that we need to keep up with New York. California needs to outshine New York. I'm an 8th generation Californian. We got to keep up, and we got to go beyond that. So what we're going to be showing you here today is part of what our goal is really to support you in this initiative by providing technology that was going to facilitate these interactions, facilitate the interoperability between the people behind the screen, behind the glass, if you will, and all those various systems at the state level as well as at the county and local level. So while we go through our proof of concept, we're going to be highlighting today not just how the technology works, but really some of those legal and confidential issues that you've been talking about this morning. This is a huge process, huge discussion area, and there's no way in the 30 minutes that we have that we're going to cover everything. So I'm going to try to simplify it wherever possible, okay? And so let's just say it's about making sure that the right person is either submitting or reviewing, kind of depending on their role, the right information at the right time, okay? So before we get started in the actual demonstration, I'm kind of a forest for the trees person. So I think just to get us all on the same page, let's kind of take a look at a system diagram. I hate to use that word, but really kind of the forest for the trees of what we're laying out here. So on the left-hand side, we see the various stakeholder groups, everything from the physicians, the caseworkers, et cetera. And then, how are they interacting? Well, typically they're interacting through some sort of a workstation. And there we have the screen, okay? We're going to be referring to that as a portal. It's our doorway into these various systems. And there's a couple of key components here. There's the smart forms, intelligent forms technology. So not just that it's electronic bits and bytes of perhaps a PDF file, but this is an intelligent smart form. And then that, along with security systems, will come together, and then through that big bar there in the center, that's really our pathway. That's the freeway to go back and forth to reach into those back-end systems and pull data. I was really interested in what you said you did in New York in terms of reconciling when you have different identifications, but actually being able to pull from those back-end systems. And I got to tell you also from the last conversation, I really think the technology is the easy part in this. The other issues are really the bigger ones. So the idea is that by using that pathway, you can retrieve information, look up information, so that at the end of the day, whether we're talking about a doctor, a lawyer, a judge, a mother, a foster parent, or whatever, they're getting the right information, the appropriate information that's secure to their role, okay? Now, just one more slide, and this one I really feel like I'm dumbing down based on the complexities of the conversation. But when we talk about security and we talk about access, it really, we're looking at these groups, and we're looking at the tiers in which they belong. And even members in different groups may have different permissions. So tier 1 is kind of that top of the iceberg or tip of the iceberg thing of legal protection. The tier 2 is the second tier, that need to know. We heard a lot about that this morning. And then that third tier is for those who must evaluate outcomes. Now, where all these people will fall into that, that's part of the governance process. And making sure that that is all understood and analyzed is really part of what will be, whether this makes us successful or not. So with that, we're going to go into our proof of concept, and we've defined what we call this is we call it a day in the life, or in this case it's kind of a week in the life, because the time span from the point of starting with the doctor to the point when it's reviewed and approved is about a little over a week as we took a look at it. Okay, so we selected 5 personas here, 5 selected people, and we're going to kind of look over their shoulders. We're going to see what they're seeing and how they're interacting with the software to perform whatever it is the function is that they're trying to accomplish, whatever it is the job is that they're trying to do. Now, the story begins off our screen. The story begins with our 15-year-old child, Antoine Baker, who has now been assigned to living in a group care foster home, okay? And Antoine has been exhibiting some behaviors and some symptoms that concern the foster parent, the caregiver in that home. So he or she brings Antoine to visit our first persona, Dr. Anthony Hoffman. No relation. That just happened to turn out. So one Friday afternoon, we're actually making this September 13th, so about a week and a half ago, Dr. Hoffman has examined Antoine, and he's interviewed him, and he's made the decision that, yes, he wants to request a prescription for Zoloft in this case. Our second persona that we're going to take a look at is the county caseworker, Angelica Smith. Okay, now we've selected Alameda County, not to say anything about any of the other counties here, but for our use case, as that term was defined earlier this morning, we're going to, Angelica Smith is the county caseworker for Alameda County. We're going to see how she interoperates with the system to request the application and process her work. Number 3 is kind of the unsung hero. My husband's an attorney, and he always tells me the clerk of the court is kind of our unsung hero. He is managing all this paperwork. He is getting everything ready for the judges, for the hearing dates, et cetera. So we thought it's very important to include Charles Lee in this story to see how he's going to manage all of these forms that are a big part of his daily process. 4th, we have the non-custodial parent. The non-custodial parent in the laws of California has certain inalienable rights, if you will, that she's still a part of Antoine's life. And in this case, we're going to see she wants to oppose the medication. So how is she going to do that? And then 5th, we have the judge. Judge Judy, I thought that was a great name that you guys selected, but Judge Judy Roth, who we're going to take a look at some of those last things we were talking about. So how does she review the case, and how does she keep up with all of these trends and things going on in terms of these psychotropic medications? Notice I used the right word there. Okay, so with that, let's get started into our proof of concept. Okay, so we have here Dr. Hoffman. As I mentioned, it was Friday afternoon, and he saw Antoine Baker, and he made the decision that he wants to prescribe the medication. He knows he needs to request it through the state via a form. How does he find the form? Well, if Dr. Hoffman has worked this process before, he may have bookmarked the state website, as you see up there in the top corner. But today, he can actually just go to Google, and he can search trying to find that form. So he's going to put in his search name, just like all of us do every day, and perform the Google search. Google's going to return a list of results, which includes 3 forms, actually, that kind of meet that search criteria. Of course, he's looking as the prescribing physician for that form. This is going to be his entry point. So he clicks on that form, and it's going to take him into now a new website. This is the new portal, if you will, for Dr. Hoffman. At this point, he's not authenticated. He's not logged in. We don't necessarily know it's Dr. Hoffman, but he's presented this page with the forms that are listed, as well as some other contextual information, such as recommendations and quick links that he might want to explore, like, how do I fill out this form? What are some things I need to be concerned about? So he doesn't have to go and just look up a policy manual. It's all here on the page together. He clicks on the form, the 220A. That's the form in question that he needs to fill out. The form now, this intelligent smart form, is loaded onto his page. Now, in looking at this form, this is a very complex form. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with it. It's 3 pages. It requests a huge amount of information, and therefore can take a huge amount of time to fill out. So by taking advantage of some of that interoperability to those back-end systems, Dr. Hoffman can take advantage of the fact that the foster parent gave him the case number for Antoine's case. So now he can log in, put in his credentials. Now you can know that this is Dr. Hoffman, and he can perform a search into one of those back-end systems. He puts in the case number, he does the search, and the system's going to return for him some verifications. Make sure he didn't just put in the wrong number. So it knows it's Antoine Baker, knows his date of birth. We have the identifying information. And now he can use the ability of these systems, of the technology, to pre-fill the form. So he's going to click on the pre-fill, and now a whole lot of information that otherwise he would have to go manually get or have his staff go and retrieve and fill in, which can be a very time-consuming process, is taken care of on the form. Now you'll notice here also on item number 2, we've got some highlights. And this is, again, one of the good things about a smart form. It's not just electronic, but it can tell him, you need to fill this out. This is a mandatory field. This needs to be selected. So that guides him, or perhaps maybe it's his physician's assistant or his office manager who's filling out this form, to make sure that they're entering the right information. Likewise, if we scroll down a little bit further, we see that Dr. Hoffman's own information is filled into there, because that also can come from one of those back-end systems. In addition, a lot of these forms, as you know, request other. If you can't give all the options, let's put in the other. Well, how do we make sure that we know what that other means? So the intelligent form allows us, when we click on other, it'll pop up and say, please specify. So the form is helping to guide to make sure we have thorough information, and by pulling from the back-end system that we have accurate information. Now, for the sake of time, again here, Scott's great at the keyboard, but it's a 3-page form. So we've written a little script that's going to go in and pretend Scott is typing. So we're going to let the system now put in as if Scott had typed here. And then we're going to take a look and go over to page 2 of this form. On page 2, there's a couple of things to point out here, and that is down on, for example, section 11, it talks about mandatory information. How many times do we get forms and it says the information is mandatory, but it's missing it? This ensures that we are not missing that information. If we go on to page 3, we see another important feature, especially dramatizing the interoperability. So here's the prior medication history for Antoine Baker. Some of this information, such as what we have in the top in 15 here, was information that the doctor collected at the time of the examination, so he can enter that. If you notice there in the center, we have the C or N. C means these were continuing medications. The N means they were new. Since they're new, then it makes sense that the doctor filled these in. On the second box, though, this is prescription medication or prescription history that could come from a back-end system. So actually this was pulled as part of that pre-fill process, and then the doctor can put in the comment as to why he is deciding to terminate that particular drug. And then in the third case, again, the entire set of history information could come, including the comments. So we're really seeing here all 3 facets of the ability to pull information that is out there in those various back-end systems you saw on the system diagram and use it to save time for the doctor, improve accuracy, and improve the security. Now, but last but not least on these smart forms is the signature. We all know on a paper form, if you sign it, there's really nothing to stop someone changing or adding information to that form after the signature. But in a smart form, that danger, that risk area goes away. So the doctor clicks to put in his signature, he enters his user ID and his password, and when he completes that click wrap signing ceremony, if you will, the form can no longer be changed. In addition, if we open up the details, we have a complete audit trail of what has happened during this signing ceremony. So if there's ever a question after the fact, we're ensuring that we have proven a safe and secure process here and a confidential process. Now, in addition, when he's doing this, it can go out to the back-end systems. And if you will, to kind of do that round trip, so that at this point where we didn't have it verified, now it's coming back with the signature has been validated, and that completes the circle. Doctor then submits the form, and the process has now started. So we'll log out of Dr. Hoffman, and we'll move on to the county caseworker, Angelica Smith. So as I mentioned, Dr. Hoffman saw the patient late Friday afternoon, took care of this right away. It's now Monday morning. Angelica Smith has come to work, and she's going to log into her site. Now, these credentials could be presented at the state level, the county level, linked to from wherever her local workplace is. A lot of different possibilities here. But we are collecting the fact that it is Alameda County, and each county's rules could be baked into this system. This is her personalized, role-based portal page. So we give her a map of Alameda County, and she's getting the advantage of some alerts. Now, alerts are a really nice way of not having things get lost in email, right? How many times does that happen? So the alerts allows her, first of all, informs her that this document has come in for Antoine Baker, but also is reminding her about some of the other things going on with her cases, with some indicators there like a red alert button or a yellow alert button that says, red, you've got something that's got to get done today. Let's not have it slip. So since it's right there front and center on her homepage, she sees it. Likewise, it's giving her an alert of something that she needs to get done this week. We've got the yellow alert. She's got a couple of cases that she needs to take care of. But let's get back to our story. She's going to click on the document received out of the alert, and now she gets her case list. So we see the detailed case number there for Antoine, so we know all of that. She's going to open up the case, and this case involves more than Antoine. He's not the only family member that's part of this case. There's his mother, and he has 2 siblings. And we also see here down in the health history, we see the 220A application that came from Dr. Hoffman. She's going to open up and she's going to review that. She has full permissions to be able to do that. And as she looks through this document, you'll notice she can't change it, but she has some questions. So she may want to collaborate with, in this case, which often happens today, the public health nurse. So she has some options. Pick up the phone, send an email, but that tends to introduce delays. What she can do is she sees the public health nurse is available online. So she can hover over her picture, initiate a chat, and in real time, they can have a very quick, effective discussion about Antoine Baker. So we're going to go through a little chat here. She's going to explain to Lucille that she has some questions about the Zoloft, and the public health nurse has some expertise that she can share with Angelica, such as, here's a great place to get some information that you could attach and forward on to the family. In addition, there's a great catch here. This boy is 15 years old. What do 15-year-old boys want to do? Get their driver's permit. I have a 16-year-old son. I understand that. Well, what happens when a child who's going to be on one of these medications is taking one of these, is going to be driving? So it's another way to improve the overall process. So not only are we talking about speed and efficiency, but we're also talking about improving results. With that, she closes the chat, and now Angelica is going to go on to her work, which she has 2 forms that she needs to fill in. Now, the first, the 219, is basically an information-only form, so we're going to focus here today on the 220. That's the actual application for the psychotropic medication. System already knows the case number, so she doesn't have to go through the full search like Dr. Hoffman did, but she can take advantage of the same pre-fill capability into this smart form. So she's going to do that. Now, in this case, it's pre-filling some information that takes a lot of time, and when we talked about some of the volumes, when we heard about some of the volumes you were talking about before, any time where we can save not just seconds, but even minutes by taking care of this, that's an overall improvement to the process, because that means Angelica can handle more cases better and pay more attention to the really important part. So she's going to fill in her work as we did before. We've helped Scott out with some of the typing, but she also wants to add attachments to this form. So that's kind of a unique thing about the 220. She can append additional information. So by clicking on the Add Attachments, she has already created some documents she has sitting on her workstation. She can go out, select them, retrieve them, add them to the document, and thereby, it's not just the form, but it's the form with its attachments. At that point, she's going to complete her signing in a similar way to Dr. Hoffman, thereby locking down the attachments as well as the form. And this is now going into that freeway that we talked about, that information highway, so that we are collecting that for Angelica. And we now have a folder with the 220A, the 219, the 220, and we can log out of Angelica and move on to our next role. As I mentioned, here's our unsung hero, the count of the clerk of the county of the family court for Alameda County. So, like Angelica, he is going to log in, collect his permissions. We know who he is. We know what county he works for. We know what the rules are of that county. And now we see the county clerk's page. Very similar, but his information is geared to his role as opposed to the role of a county social worker. He also has alerts. Alerts about cases that are coming up, alerts about appeals that may have happened on a case, as well as a place for maybe frequently asked questions and bookmarks. But what Charles's job is to do today is to prepare for a whole bunch of cases that are going to be coming up for hearing the next few days. So he likes to go in and he kind of works alphabetically. So he's on the B's right now. He's going to put in, I want to see all cases whose the party starts with BA and whose hearing dates have already been set for the next 4 days. Does his search, and then he's going to get his list. Okay? So here's the list of cases, and for our proof of concept here, Antoine's case is the first one on here. He's going to open up that case and he's going to see all the documents that have come in. Now at this point, this is where we start talking about privacy and confidentiality, whether or not can Charles Lee actually view the documents, or is it just more appropriate that he can see that they are there? In either case, what his job is to add the documents appropriate to the court. So he's going to select new, and then the system is going to tell him, you need to do the 221 and the 223. The 221 is the opposition notification. So let's go in and take a look at the 221. Again, we're going to take advantage of the fact that we know the case number. Now we have a court case number as well as we have the child welfare case number. He can pre-fill that form, saving Charles a lot of time when, as someone said, 600 cases going on, that he needs to resolve. The information about the non-custodial parent, Carol Baker, the information about the caregiver at the group home, all of that comes in and can be pre-populated, saving Charles a huge amount of time. Charles is then going to sign this form, and he's going to make sure that he does put those oppositions in the mail just as current process provides, and just as he is supposed to do. So he just deposited it in the mail, he accepts the form. Just like before, the form is now secure, and it's been added to the folder. When he goes to the 223, though, the 223 is the actual order. And while Charles maybe one day would like to be a judge, and maybe he's aspiring to be a judge, he still can't sign the form that the judge needs to sign, right? So what he's going to do, though, is he's going to prepare the form for the judge. He's going to use the pre-fill capability. It can go out there and get the information about, for example, when Dr. Hoffman submitted that prescription request. It's going to put in the information about the particular court. But when he goes down, he's not going to sign it, right? Because we don't want this locked. It's up to the judge to make the decisions on whether it's going to be granted or not granted. So at this point, he can save the form in process and then submit it so that, again, the collection of documents associated with this case is now out there for the next steps to occur. So we've done all this in the course of, let's say, a Friday, Monday, Tuesday, and we're off and running, and the case has been set for September 24th. But he put in the mail that notice for all the interested parties that they could oppose this. So we have here now Carol Baker. She's Antoine's non-custodial birth mother, okay? And she's she's opened her mail and she's received that notification. And Carol Baker, in this case, doesn't agree with the administration of psychotropic medications. So she perhaps picks up the phone and calls Angelica, or perhaps she just goes directly to the web using her device in this case, which, just to show that it doesn't have to be necessarily a PC, she uses her iPad. So she's going to go out to her iPad, like Dr. Hoffman, kind of a member of the public. She starts her day at Google. How many of us like to use Google as our search? So she's going to put in her search term, and here comes the document at the top of her search list that says, here's the opposition to the application regarding psychotropic medications. She's going to select that document, and it's going to pop up here on her iPad. Now notice that she hasn't logged in anywhere. So we don't know if this is Carol Baker or John Smith or Antoine Baker, for that matter, right, at this point. So we can't use the pre-fill capability. She needs to enter in all of this information herself, okay? And so we're going to use the scripting capability to save Scott some typing time. She puts in her information. She may not even complete all of this stuff about, what the address of the court is. She doesn't need to worry about that. But now when she still needs to sign this document, and when she clicks to sign, this is our opportunity to find out, is this really Carol Baker? Okay, so we can give her some challenge questions, because if you recall, when we looked at the detailed case, Carol Baker was part of the overall case that Angelica Smith looked like. There is information in many of those back-end systems probably about Carol Baker, but so we can try to authenticate and make sure that we have the right Carol Baker here by asking her, for example, her mother's maiden name and her city and state of birth. That's really up to you. You can request any kind of challenge questions. We've just could have put a couple of little examples out there. So we're going to accept that data, and now it's going to go, when she submits the form, it can go into back-end systems, and then there can be some of those, if you will, back-end processes that can do a check. Is this really her mother's maiden name? Perhaps you want all of those kind of forms to be routed to someone to be reviewed, or perhaps only when there's an exception. Maybe the name didn't match, maybe the city and state didn't match, then it's routed to someone to resolve before that document is really fully accepted for review. That's kind of part of that governance evaluation that has to happen. But it's possible, at least the technology supports it. So with that, it's now Tuesday, September 24th. It is today. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, and Judge Judy Roth is going to come into work. We're going to have Judge Judy authenticate, checking her user ID and password in the same way we did with Charles Lee and with Angelica Smith. And now we're seeing what we call the judge's portal. I want to take just a second or two to explore this, because when we were talking earlier about communities, setting up an interoperability community or communities of other discussion, this is a great place that we've set up here for the judge, so that if she's dealing with a lot of cases with people with ADD or ADHD, she may want to participate in a community around that. She may want to have discussion forums. She may want to be able to talk to some of her other colleagues, again in real time, in the similar way that we saw with Angelica Smith and the public health nurse. She may participate in activities such as outreach, as many judges do. So this is kind of her home page with the facility to have it all together, her role-based user experience. But getting back to our story, she's going to go in and look at her cases. Now, we certainly minimize the number of cases here that Judge Judy has compared to real life, but that's part of our proof of concept. So she sees here the case for Antoine Baker, but she also sees an alert. And this is where the alert has helped point out that this opposition that came in between the time Charles Lee did his work and the time that the judge is going to review the case, it double alerts her, if you will. You know, when she opens the case, yeah, she's going to see all the forms, but isn't it nice to have that really pointed out to her? So she notes the alert, and now she's going to go in and review the case. She goes into here, and now all of the documents are assembled. We've put them in date order. They could be in form number order, whatever the case may be. And she reviews all the information. She considers the case carefully. She's read the opposition. She's done a little study. She's decided that she's going to grant the request. So she's going to go into the Form 223, that form that Charles prepared for her, and she sees the information that he's done so far. And now it's just a matter for her, in her busy schedule, to be able to note that the opposition was reviewed, so she check marks that box, when it was received, so a calendar pops up, that she saw that all of the notice requirements were met, and then she in this case is going to grant the request for the psychotropic medication as requested. She goes down and completes her sign-in. Similar as what you've seen before, we have user ID and password. She's going to submit the form, and now basically the case is complete in terms of the administrative process, and Antoine Baker can start getting the medications that he wants to get. So let me just review what we've shown here very briefly, and then we'll open this up to some questions and discussion. We saw there on the doctor that he was able to save a lot of time. He was able to pull a lot of good information and have that information appear there on the form. It guided him through the process, and we made sure that we had a secure sign-off and that form could not be altered by any other person once the doctor was done. We saw on the Angelica Smith, on the county social worker, how that form came to her, how she could collaborate better, faster, more efficiently with some of her colleagues and complete the information. We saw on Charles Lee, our clerk of the court, how really we've saved him a huge amount of time, again, through the pre-population and for him to be able to prepare these documents. We brought the non-custodial parent into the process so that she didn't get left out in the cold still dealing with paper and manual forms, and yet we were able to make sure, even though she's not per se a known user with a user ID and a password and all that great IT stuff, that we could verify she is who she says she is. And then last but not least, we saw in the judge that she, again, has some time savings here. She knows that the documents are accurate and correct, and she can make a good judgment. So with that, I'd like to invite a couple of my colleagues, Larry Presley, software IT architect, and Rena Burns, who I know a lot of you know because I've seen her, been greeted here today. She is our Smart Planet for Government Industry expert, and perhaps we can answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks for the demonstration. One thing I'm sure a lot of people noticed, in California, with very few exceptions, we call it the juvenile. It's a juvenile court that deals with these issues, deals with issues in foster care, and we don't call them family courts, which is a separate division. One thing I wanted to ask is, many kids in foster care have had this experience of having report after report after report duplicate misinformation about them for years. And so pre-filling forms makes it easier to do that in some ways. So what, in your thinking, is the mechanism for correcting it? So if the doctor or anybody along the line wants to change something that's pre-filled, but it might be something that's in, a dozen predecessor forms.
Right.
How does that work in the system when there's a disconnect?
Let me comment on that. I think especially on the doctor's form, where we're pulling a lot of that prescription history information. Okay, while the information is pre-filled, at that point the doctor is probably validating it. He is asking the questions. The foster parent may have brought some of their own records with it. He can make changes to that. Just because it's pre-filled doesn't mean that the doctor doesn't have the authority and absolutely should be able to perhaps add other information or correct any information that is incorrect, right? If after the doctor signs the form, let's say someone else downstream from that wants to make a change to the doctor's form, it's important that the doctor know about that, right? Because it's got his signature on it. So the form itself, the SMART form, can be routed back to the doctor. And because he has the ownership of that form, he can actually delete his signature, and then he can go in and update it or change it. Okay, but he has the control. It makes sure that someone is not speaking for the doctor inappropriately, correct? So that helps ensure that we don't have improper data coming into the system when the doctor has said, this is what I've said, you know, and this is his report. We don't want someone changing what the doctor has to say.
And think about this. Today they have a paper form. They come in with the health and education passport documentation and paper to bring the history of medications, and they may not be accurate at that point either. But I guess the question is, great point, how do you update it even electronically? And the doctor has the ability, even though it was pre-filled, there are fields that we didn't demonstrate that could be clicked on and open additional fields which would allow for comments and corrections as well.